I never thought the woman I vowed to spend my life with would be the one to break me. But as I walked away from the ruins of my marriage, I had no idea that fate had something entirely different, and far better, waiting for me. No. That's not happening, I said firmly. She blinked at me, her expression shifting into one of confusion. What are you talking about now? She asked, her tone laced with impatience. I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. You just assumed I'd sit here and listen to whatever excuse you had lined up, didn't you? Her irritation flared instantly. Where do you think you're going? She snapped, her voice rising slightly. Anywhere that isn't here, I replied without hesitation. Her lips pressed into a pout, that same spoiled look she always got when things didn't go her way. What does that even mean, anywhere but here? That's not something you need to worry about, I said, my voice colder than I expected. She scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. Honestly, Mark, grow up. It's the 21st century. People do things differently now. A humorless chuckle escaped me. Oh, I'm sure you have changed, I replied coolly. But me? I'm still the same guy. Maybe a little older, a little grayer, but I haven't lost who I am. You, on the other hand, you're not the person you used to be. And that's not a compliment. Her hand instinctively smoothed over her clothes, as if checking to make sure she still looked as polished and put together as ever. Then, with a mock-wounded expression, she tilted her head. And what exactly is that supposed to mean? For starters, I said, my voice edged with frustration, you mentioned having dinner with someone. You admitted it was a guy, but somehow his name is some big secret? That's a new one. She waved a dismissive hand, like the whole conversation was beneath her. Don't be ridiculous. I've told you, I love you more than ever. That hasn't changed. Well, I can't say the same, I admitted. An hour ago, I would have told you I loved you more than anything. But in the last 60 minutes? That love has been fading, fast. And right now, it feels more like disgust. Her expression hardened, twisting into something between offense and defiance. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. I knew you'd react like this. So predictable. So disappointing. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. Yeah, I muttered. Life's full of disappointments. I shrugged. Just yesterday, I was aiming for an 85 on the golf course, but I ended up with an 87 because of 3 terrible putts on the 11th. Things don't always go the way we plan. For a split second, her confident demeanor wavered. She hated being brushed off like that. Harper thrived on respect. She built her own business from the ground up, had a degree from one of the top schools in the country, and made almost as much money as I did. People admired her, and she expected me to do the same. Her voice tightened, wounded pride seeping through. I don't understand why you'd say something so unfair. I met her gaze without hesitation. I'm leaving, Mark. And this doesn't change anything, she continued, lifting her chin slightly as if trying to reclaim the control she was so used to having. Sure, maybe it's selfish, but I justify it because I know it's what's best. You'll see, eventually everything will be fine. I exhaled slowly and shook my head. You're completely wrong. You think nothing's changing, but everything already has. Her brows knitted together in confusion. What's changed? You have, I said firmly. Your attitude, your priorities, everything about you is different now. You've convinced yourself of this twisted version of reality, and whether you realize it or not, it's changing the way I see you too. And trust me, Harper, there's more change coming. Her defiance flared up again. Like what? She challenged. I let a beat of silence hang between us before I said, for one, have you thought about how Sophie and Maya will react when they find out their parents are splitting up? She sighed, impatiently waving away the comment as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. Splitting up? Stop being so dramatic. We're not getting divorced. And besides, our choices are none of their business. I nodded slightly. On one hand, I agree, our relationship is ours to handle. But this? What you're doing? It's not just about us. It's about you, and someone else. She let out a bitter laugh and shook her head. Oh, I see, she muttered, clearly annoyed. You're going to make this as difficult as possible, aren't you? Then, her tone softened ever so slightly, the smallest crack in her resolve. Mark, let's just drop this for now and work it out. No, I said, my voice firm. We're not working anything out. She stared at me, searching my face, maybe for hesitation, maybe for a sign that I'd give in. But there was nothing left to find. The problem, I continued calmly, is that I don't believe you. Your actions today speak louder than any words you've said, and I'm not changing my mind. I stepped back, my decision already made. I'm done, Harper. Go ahead with your date. And with that, I turned and walked away. I won't be here when you get back. I grabbed my jacket, wallet, and keys, my movements steady and deliberate. I wasn't rushing. I wanted her to hear every word, to understand that I meant it. Wait, she called after me, the sharp click of her high heels echoing against the hardwood as she hurried to catch up. But she was too late. By the time she reached the door, I had already stepped outside, shutting it behind me without a backward glance. As I slid into my car and started the engine, I caught a glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, standing there, hands clenched at her sides, watching as I pulled away. I needed a distraction. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Maya. Netflix and chill? Her reply came almost instantly. Want some company? I smirked and sent back a heart emoji. I'll bring popcorn, she added. 15 minutes later, I pulled up to her house, and before I could even knock, her dog Rocky, a massive drooling Dogue de Bordeaux, practically tackled me at the door. Hey there, big guy, I laughed, scratching his massive head as he wagged his whole body in excitement. He let out a happy snort, pressing against me and promptly smearing drool all over my pants. Maya appeared in the doorway, holding a glass of wine in one hand and a bowl of popcorn in the other. She eyed my stained pants and grinned. Rocky's way of saying he missed you. Yeah, I got that, I chuckled, giving the dog one last pat before stepping inside. I took a sip of the wine and raised an eyebrow. Sweet wine, huh? She shot me a playful glare. Not a word. I like sweet wine even if you don't. My house, my rules. I smirked. Hey, I tried to raise you right. You just went rogue. She laughed, tossing a blanket over my legs as she curled up beside me on the couch. So, she started, her voice more curious than casual. What's Mom up to tonight? I exhaled, leaning my head back against the couch. No idea. Maya frowned. That's weird. Yeah, I muttered, the weight of the situation settling over me again. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze sharp. Dad, what's really going on? You don't seem like yourself. I hesitated for half a second, then just came out with it. When I got home, she told me, flat out, that she was going on a date. The frustration was clear in my voice. When I called her out on it, she tried to backpedal, saying she'd cancel so we could talk. But by that point, I'd had enough. I walked out. Maya's expression shifted from curiosity to pure disbelief. Are you serious? Are you sure you heard her right? I let out a dry laugh. I wish I could say I misunderstood. I shook my head. But I didn't. This isn't some joke. She stared at me for a moment, then sighed, setting down her glass. Wow. Yeah. I didn't have anything else to say. And for once, neither did she. I exhaled heavily, my voice thick with emotion. What the hell is happening? Maya's expression hardened. She lied to me, Dad. Her voice trembled, breaking under the weight of the realization. She told me she was with you. She flat out lied. I know, sweetheart, I murmured, pulling her close. She buried her face in my chest, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I ran a hand over her hair, trying to soothe her, but there was no comfort to offer. After a moment, she pulled back slightly, her sadness shifting into something sharper. Her blue eyes burned with frustration. How is this supposed to be okay? She demanded. Before I could answer, the front door swung open and Sophie walked in, her face scrunched with concern. What's going on? She asked, looking between us. I was at a party, so this better be important. Maya lifted an eyebrow. Are you drunk? Sophie grinned sheepishly. I had a couple margaritas and a cocktail, so maybe just a little. Maya rolled her eyes, then shot me a look. Go make her some coffee, Dad. She needs to sober up for this. I sighed but got up and brewed a pot. By the time Sophie had downed 2 cups, she was clear-headed and ready to listen. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we moved inside. The warmth of the evening gave way to the cool stillness of night. Want a mojito? I asked, glancing at Maya. Her face lit up with a small smile. Absolutely. I whipped up 2 strong ones while she got a fire going in the fireplace. We settled onto the couch, sipping our drinks, passing a cigarette between us, letting the conversation drift from deep reflections to light-hearted nonsense. After a while, Maya broke the comfortable silence. What's on your mind, Dad? I stared into the fire for a moment, swirling the last of my drink in my glass. I'm running through my options, I admitted. But everything depends on what comes next. Later, after they'd gone to bed, I took a long walk back to the lake house. The night was still, the water reflecting the scattered lights from passing boats. I sank onto the porch glider, watching them drift across the lake, their silhouettes cutting through the darkness. And that's when it hit me, the loneliness. I missed Harper. Not just the person but the simple moments we used to share. The easy companionship that had been ours for years. Hoping to clear my head, I let the night swallow me whole. I took the boat out in the late afternoon, casting my line among the cedar thickets. The water was calm, the silence broken only by the occasional splash as I reeled in a few crappies. By the time I was done, I had 6 decent-sized ones. Back at the cabin, I cleaned them up and tossed some frozen fries in the oven, ending up with a surprisingly satisfying meal. Simple but good. Something about fresh fish always tasted better, even when life felt like it was falling apart around me. Later that evening, tension filled the room as the conversation took a turn. Sophie, she left Dad. She broke our family apart so she could run around doing whatever she wants, Maya said, frustration thick in her voice. I'm not taking her side, Sophie snapped back. Maya scoffed. Are you sure about that? Because it sounds like you're making excuses for her. Sophie's jaw clenched. It's not that simple. No, it is that simple, Maya shot back, her voice rising. Mom betrayed Dad. She's wrong. And if you can't see that, you're as blind as she is. All right, that's enough, I cut in, pulling them both into a somewhat forced hug. Maya leaned into me, but Sophie stiffened, then yanked away, grabbed her bag and stormed out without another word. Maya sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. God, I'm so mad at her right now. I squeezed her shoulder. I know. Later that night, I found myself sitting across from Harper, the air thick with things left unsaid. When I say I went about this wrong, I mean I should have explained my intentions better, she admitted, exhaling slowly. Maybe if I had, it wouldn't feel so intolerable for you. I raised an eyebrow. Harper, you'd need a magic wand to make this tolerable. Any chance you've picked up some magical powers recently? A faint smile crossed her lips. Not exactly magic, but close. I gestured for her to continue. Go ahead then. She leaned back against the couch, arms crossed. Mark, think about it. How old are we now? I'm 47 and you're? I cut her off, my voice steady. What I don't understand is why you think we can't do those things together. Why bringing other people into it is even an option. She hesitated. I think we can explore together, she said carefully. But when I brought up the date, I thought maybe we could do it separately. You could try it too, if you wanted. I stared at her, stunned. Harper, when I think of together, I think of just the two of us. The second you bring in a third person, it's not together anymore. It's something else entirely. Do you get that? She leaned back, folding her arms tightly across her chest. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze flickering away. You're going to go through with this no matter how I feel, aren't you? I asked, my voice low. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she looked away. And that told me everything I needed to know. I don't know, Mark. I think I might. My chest tightened. And that was what hurt the most. The fact that you've thought this through, I said, my voice quiet but firm. That you've planned it. That you can sit here and talk about it like it's nothing. It tells me you've been hiding things for a while. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. So what else haven't you told me, Harper? She hesitated, looking away. And what about Friday night? I pressed. She exhaled, guilt flickering across her face. I'm sorry about Friday, she said softly. I shouldn't have done that. I was just angry because you walked out. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. Yeah, because I had to. She didn't say anything. And honestly, I didn't have the energy to keep digging for answers that wouldn't change anything. I turned on a podcast during the drive, desperate for something to drown out the noise in my head. But by the time I pulled up to the house, I couldn't recall a single word of it. Inside, I moved on autopilot, unpacking in a daze, my body drained and my mind just as exhausted. An hour passed before my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Sophie. I took a steadying breath before answering. Hey, sweetheart. Where are you, Daddy? She asked, concern threading through her voice. I'm at the lake, I replied. Where are you? I'm at your house, she said quietly. Something in her tone made my stomach sink. Mom's here too. I closed my eyes for a moment, gripping the edge of the counter. I'll be there soon. No matter what else had fallen apart, I still had them. My daughters. My family, what was left of it. Later that evening, Maya and I sat down to dinner. No matter how heavy the night felt, she was here, solid and steady. The food was incredible and we both ate in comfortable silence, savoring every bite. After a while, I set my fork down and glanced at her. So, I began cautiously, how did things go with your mom? Maya's expression darkened, her fork freezing midair. Not great, she admitted. She had a lot of excuses, but it all boiled down to one thing, she was bored. She let out a bitter laugh. She actually said she wanted to relive the excitement of feeling young again. I sighed, setting my glass down. All right, I said, shifting gears. Let me ask you something. I met her eyes. If you were looking at this situation as a professional, not as my daughter. Maya exhaled sharply. Dad, I can't separate the two. You know that. I know, I said gently. But just try. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. I'll do my best. Before she could continue, Sophie walked in. Would you two like a drink first? I asked, standing up. Sophie raised an eyebrow. What have you got? I've got stuff for Palomas, I offered, heading into the kitchen to mix them. The time alone gave me a moment to gather my thoughts. And I needed that moment more than I realized. When I returned, we were all settled with our drinks, bracing ourselves for the inevitable conversation. So, Sophie, Maya said, a teasing glint in her eye. Are you still dating that, what's his name? Sophie laughed. Nope. He turned out to be a total jerk. Then she smirked. But I did meet someone new about a month ago. His name's Miles. I nodded. Well, at least you upgraded. She chuckled, taking a sip of her drink. We'll see. For a moment the mood felt light, normal even, but reality had a way of creeping back in. In the weeks that followed, Maya kept her distance from Harper, only mentioning her when absolutely necessary. Sophie, on the other hand, would give occasional updates, how Harper was resistant to individual therapy but had agreed to consider couples counseling. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the lake, Maya turned to me. What do you think, Dad? About the therapy thing? I sighed, staring into my glass. I don't think couples counseling will fix this if she doesn't address the real issue. Maya nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I figured. She didn't say anything else, and honestly neither did I. Some things didn't need words. Later that week, Harper and I sat across from each other, the weight of everything pressing between us. If I wasn't enough for you, I said quietly, my voice steady but firm, then why did you want to spend the rest of your life with me? She stiffened. I never said I wasn't happy, Mark, she argued, her tone instantly defensive. I leaned forward slightly. Maybe you just used the wrong word. But don't play word games with me, Harper. You've made it painfully clear that you weren't satisfied. Her jaw clenched. Then you're not hearing me, she shot back. I'm satisfied. I just wanted to add something new. Something that could make our lives even better. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Harper, better for who? She didn't answer. And that told me everything I needed to know. A few nights later, she kissed me. It was familiar, the kind of kiss that once carried years of love and understanding. But reality crashed in and my body just stopped responding. She kept kissing me, slower this time, searching for something. Some reaction, some reassurance. But when she finally pulled back, confusion clouded her face. What's wrong? She asked, her voice uncertain. I swallowed hard, looking at her, really looking at her. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I had an answer. I looked her straight in the eyes. Harper, have you met someone else? Her expression faltered. It was just a split second, but I saw it, the hesitation, the way her breath caught in her throat. And in that moment, I knew. She took a deep breath, then whispered, Yes, Mark? I have. A sharp, twisting pain settled in my stomach, but I forced myself to stay calm. A few days later we met again, but this time I was the one in control. I dropped the suit, I said flatly, my voice devoid of emotion. Her eyes flickered with surprise. You did? I nodded. Because I refuse to be forced into something I don't want. I took a step closer, my tone turning firm. But until you end this nonsense, I'm cutting you off completely. Don't call me. Don't write. Don't send messages. She opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked away. For the next 2 months, Harper tried everything to reach me. She used Sophie as a go-between, which only stirred up more tension. It wasn't fair to her or Maya, and I knew it. But I had made my decision. By January, Sophie came to visit, and we spent the week exploring Puerto Rico, lounging by the ocean, and enjoying the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. On our last day, as we sat on the sand watching the waves roll in, she turned to me, her voice quieter than usual. You're not coming back, are you, Daddy? I exhaled slowly. I haven't decided, I admitted. But I'm leaning towards staying. She hesitated. The only reason you'd come back is for me and Maya, isn't it? I nodded. Of course. I'll visit you girls whenever you want. She studied me for a long moment, then asked, What about Mom? I glanced at her, gauging her expression. How's she doing? Sophie shrugged. She works a lot. Then, after a pause, she added, I think she regrets everything. I frowned slightly. How can you tell? She smirked. Dad, I have the right to be nosy. I chuckled. All right, all right. Later that evening, as we sat on the balcony, Sophie's face suddenly lit up with excitement. I want to buy a cabin, she announced, barely containing her enthusiasm. I raised an eyebrow. That's interesting. Is it an existing property? Does it generate income? Can I look it up online? Yes and yes, she said quickly. But I'd rather you visit it. I leaned forward, intrigued. All right. Where is it? She hesitated for a second, then grinned. About 10 miles from you? I narrowed my eyes. Sophie? She burst into laughter. It's on Lake Baraka? I stared at her in disbelief. You're kidding? Nope. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. Maybe, just maybe, some things had a way of coming full circle. I laughed out loud. You're pulling my leg. Sophie just grinned. Nope. Dead serious. That Friday night, I was at my usual table in the kitchen of a small, tucked-away restaurant I'd grown fond of. The chef, a familiar face by now, approached me with a polite smile. Mr. Green, would you mind some company tonight? He asked. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure, why not? A few minutes later, he returned, with a woman who momentarily stole my breath. She was stunning. Her elegant yellow dress fell just below her knees, one shoulder bare, and a subtle slit revealed a perfectly toned leg as she walked. Glossy black curls streaked with silver framed her striking heart-shaped face. And those eyes, dark, luminous, filled with something both sharp and warm. I stood as she approached, offering a polite nod. Mark Green, I introduced myself. She smiled, her voice smooth and confident. Melanie Vasquez. As we settled into conversation, she tilted her head slightly. So, you're new here, like Maya? I moved here about a year ago, I explained. I came first, and after visiting, Maya fell in love with the place and followed. Her curiosity seemed genuine. What brought you here? Fishing mostly, I admitted. But I stayed for the peace and freedom. Sold my business back in the States and decided it was time to live life differently. She studied me thoughtfully. What kind of business did you run? I hesitated before answering, but something about her made me feel at ease. Corporate consulting, I said. It was good for a long time, but I wanted something simpler. She chuckled, then with a seamless switch, continued in Spanish. So, you left behind all of that for quiet mornings by the water? I grinned, matching her language. Best decision I've made in years. Her fluency and eloquence in both languages only added to her charm. I'd like to know more about you, Melanie, I said, my curiosity growing. What's your story? She tilted her head, studying me with a mix of amusement and caution. Just because I'm friends with your daughter? Exactly, I replied with a grin. Purely for Maya's sake. She laughed, warm and rich, her voice like music. Well, I own quite a bit of land along the river. I keep horses, but mostly cattle. What breed? Mostly Brangus, she said, eyes lighting up at the topic. Strong, resilient, perfect for the climate here. I nodded, impressed. She took a sip of her wine, then looked at me thoughtfully. I'm sorry to hear about what you've been through, Mark. I shrugged, offering a small smile. That's life. A moment of quiet passed before I spoke again. Melanie, would you let me take you to dinner sometime? Maybe next weekend? Her face brightened with a smile. I'd love that. But I have to go to Los Matches the day after tomorrow. Then when you're back, I said. She held my gaze, then nodded. It's a deal. And just like that, something unfamiliar stirred in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Oh, I won't be back until Tuesday, Melanie said. How about the Friday after that? Perfect, I replied, pulling out my phone. Can I get your number? I'll make a reservation and send you the details. She handed me her phone and I quickly saved my contact. As I handed it back, she gave me a playful look. When you pick me up, maybe I'll let you in on the conspiracy, she teased. I raised an eyebrow. Conspiracy? She chuckled. You don't think Maya was subtly matchmaking? I smirked. So that's what those two had been up to. A moment later, my phone buzzed. Melanie had sent a message, just a series of smiley faces and hearts. Resistance is futile. My own daughter. I texted back. Looking forward to our date. Each day after that felt like an eternity. I hadn't felt this kind of anticipation in years, like a teenager waiting for a first date. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. Harper had gone searching for that thrill, the excitement of something new. And yet, here I was, finding it in a way I never expected. When Friday finally arrived, I pulled up to Melanie's home, stepping out of the car just as the front door opened. A young woman stood in the doorway watching me with interest. Good evening, Mr. Mark, she said with a warm but composed smile. I'm Isa, Melanie's daughter. Her English was polished and effortless, just like her mother's. Nice to meet you, Isa, I replied in Spanish, smiling. You look so much like your mom, just as beautiful. Do you speak English? A faint blush touched her cheeks, much like Melanie's had at dinner. Yes, I speak English, Spanish, and French. Then she laughed softly. My French isn't as good, though. I bet you're amazing at all three, I said with a grin. She motioned for me to sit and we settled into comfortable chairs on the porch. The evening air was warm, the sky tinged with the last colors of sunset. I love it here, Isa said, looking out at the quiet landscape. I nodded. It's a special place. She turned to me, her dark eyes sharp with curiosity. Let's have a real conversation. I couldn't help but smile. There was something about her confidence, well beyond her years. You're very much your mother's daughter, I said. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment before smiling. I'll take that as a compliment. And something told me this wasn't just going to be a dinner date. This was the beginning of something much bigger. I chuckled. I've only had one real conversation with your mom, I admitted. Somehow you never came up. Isa grinned. She doesn't mention me much. Then, with playful mischief, she added, probably afraid people will like me better than her. We both laughed just as Carla appeared, carrying a pitcher of fresh lemonade. Isa and I poured ourselves glasses, the conversation flowing easily. Dinner was everything I had hoped it would be. Melanie's conversation was effortless, filled with warmth and sharp wit, and the food, simply outstanding. But more than anything, there was a rhythm to the evening, a natural ease between us that made everything feel right. Afterward, we visited Salon Tempo, a lively spot bursting with mariachi music, vibrant decorations, and an energy that was downright infectious. Melanie moved across the dance floor with effortless grace, switching seamlessly between traditional Mexican dances, salsa, and tango. Holding her close during a slow dance felt almost surreal, like something out of a dream. Driving back to her house, the night's events played over in my mind, each moment more vivid than the last. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts swirled around the day. Every moment had felt like a new chapter in a story I hadn't even realized I was writing. One filled with laughter, connection, and a happiness I hadn't felt in years. Maya had been right. Between my growing bond with Melanie, the unexpected but welcome presence of Isa, and Sophie's plan to move here, my life had reached a richness I never thought possible again. The next morning, I woke early, energized in a way I hadn't been in years. That evening we gathered for dinner again. This time, tacos on the grill with my pico de gallo once again stealing the show. Conversation flowed effortlessly, with Maya and Isa keeping everyone entertained with their playful banter. It was hard to believe we'd only been in each other's lives for such a short time. It already felt like we'd always been a family. After dinner, Melanie and I took a walk along the river while Maya and Isa stayed behind to clean up. The cool evening air was crisp, the gentle rush of water adding a quiet rhythm to our steps. For a while, we strolled in comfortable silence until Melanie finally spoke. This feels different, she said softly. I glanced at her. Good different? She smiled. Very. I reached for her hand and she didn't hesitate. As the fire crackled back at the house and the distant sound of laughter drifted through the air, I found myself reflecting on every path that had led me here. And for the first time in a long, long while, the future looked brighter than ever. I felt truly grateful for every twist and turn life had thrown my way, because somehow they had all led me here. To this moment. A moment I knew I would treasure forever. Melanie sat up beside me, her face glowing with a mix of love and quiet vulnerability as she watched Isa and me. Across the room, Maya and Sophie exchanged a knowing look, their smiles wide as they leaned against the headboard, already conspiring. The air was charged with something new, something deeper. A connection that felt unshakable. Maya and Sophie wasted no time peppering us with questions about wedding plans, their excitement practically overflowing. Isa, beaming with pride, sat up straighter. I have to help pick out the flowers, she announced. Melanie laughed, shaking her head. I wouldn't dream of planning it without you. Sophie, ever the practical thinker, tapped her fingers against her knee. Do you think we should have it here? In Tulum? She asked, her mind already ticking through possibilities. It's beautiful, and it would make for an incredible destination wedding. Melanie smiled, considering it for a moment before shaking her head. As tempting as that sounds, I think we'd be happier keeping it simple. Somewhere close to home. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. Wherever it is, I said softly, as long as it's with you, It'll be perfect.